Evening. Welcome to the August 23rd, 2022 work session of the McMinnville City Council. We will call this meeting to order and be pleased to hear about our next steps in Fire Consolidation District from our Fire Chief, Rich Lickford. Thank you.
Mayor, I appreciate it. Mayor and Council, this evening in your packet, you have a memo discussing next steps and some draft documents. I want to be perfectly clear, those are draft documents that we're preparing as we're working through. We're working off of templates according to election law. They have not been reviewed by the attorney yet, but we know we have to have certain parameters within these documents before we get them reviewed. And there's some discussions this evening that we need to have with council on should the election be successful, what do we do with our assets, our debts, our facilities, the city's taxing authority. All of those have to be outlined within the documents that we have to submit, for whether it's a petition or whether it's directed by the commissioners to be on the ballot. So this is the pre-legwork for basically creating the petition for application for the election for the consolidation. So as we're moving through the process, some of the things that are in the both the memo as well as the draft resolution are lined out as a requirement of what we have to put in there just by state law. And if this new district were to be formed, what happens to the assets of the city of McMinnville that are used for fire protection services? And within the narrative and within the draft resolution, as well as the feasibility statement that we have to prepare for the state, we've identified, for purposes of discussion, that the vehicles, equipment, and materials used for fire protection purposes would be transferred to the new district from the city of McMinnville. We identified that there would be real property leases established for the real properties that are currently owned by McMinnville. One of those being the fire department training area, and one of those being the fire station itself. And we've had some modified drafts, so I can't remember which draft you got, but one of the drafts indicated that at the 10-year mark we would evaluate what to do with the fire station, if it was still a viable, feasible, or if we would renegotiate the lease or we'd sell the property. And all that has to be determined what that would look like, but we need to determine that prior to the petition for application for, which would be by our next council meeting. So that's the reason we're here for a work session this evening, is to try and get council to understand the decisions and our timelines that need to be made in our timelines, and help us move through those processes. We've discussed some of the assets are the ambulance billing accounts that have already been billed, that are still in billing process with SDW, excuse me. We identified the volunteer fire retirement fund that was been allocated and funded to pay for retirements for volunteers as a recruitment process for our volunteer firefighters. The debts, there's a vehicle fleet loan that we have out there for the purchase of the truck and the engine that has $580,000 and some change still on it that would need to transfer over. And then we brought into the dialogue that we have to, because we have to identify what the new tax rate of the district is and what it would do to the tax rate within the city if we kept the tax rate, the city kept the tax rate with the remaining dollars available the same. So we have to identify those items within the resolution, so as we move forward. So for this evening's purposes, I was hoping to have a dialogue with council on were the draft documents in line with what council thoughts were, or were there some changes? Were there some thoughts out there on what we wanted to do? We also wanted to really have a good solid dialogue on the remaining taxing authority, and if it's the city's wishes and intent to retain the entire taxing authority. And if that is so, then we would use, and we've already discussed with our consultants, the polling process on how to implement that taxing authority later on in the process. Part of our challenge is messaging, and what that looks like as we come out the door now with the taxing authority without having all of that information, but all that information could come out shortly after the final petition is filed, and so that the messaging can be picked up where we leave off with the petition messaging process. So, and I'll hold there and see if there's questions, thoughts, Anything that you would like me to dive into deeper?
Yeah, I'm thinking maybe we go through your punch list in order,
Okay,
just so that we're not too all over the place.
Okay.
So with that in mind, then, if we started by discussing asset and debt transfer, I'd just open that topic up to council for questions of the chief, discussion. And if we don't have anything right now and there is something else on the list and we need to pause and come back, that's fine. We can be adaptable. This just seems like a good initial approach. But hopefully it's not like telling you can only ask 2 questions, because that didn't work. Okay. Council President, thank you.
Yeah, Rich, in that document, there's no mention of Station 12 because that's a lease facility, but what's the terms of that lease and how does that kind of fold into the new district?
That lease is month to month, and that is already built into our current budget, so it is built into the new district's budget. So the city would not have to get it. We can give a 30-day notice transfer, and then the new district can pick it up on the backside.
Okay, and then the Comcast building, it's not currently in use, but there has been talk of potential fire service use out there, and so how does that fold into this document?
So it didn't fold into this document, but it does, we probably do want to make sure the council's aware that we are still very interested in looking at that property as a future fire station. And that whether it's through the lease process or whatever that, or if this doesn't come to fruition, even if we stay at the City of McMinnville Fire Department, that property is very viable property for a future substation. Well, there will have to be some remodeling and some earthquake improvements, which we can get grants for. But the building official and the fire marshal have both reviewed it and looked at it and are looking at giving us some options on how to best go through the process to make sure we can be compliant and still be cost effective for the upgrades and remodel for that station. And that location would significantly improve our response area to the areas we're not meeting our response on that entire airport strip out there on Highway 18.
Okay. That's it for questions for now. I'll come back to some stuff later.
Councilor Chenoweth, Councilor Gary? Okay.
Could I just?
Yes, please, Councilor
I'm sorry,
Menke.
the Comcast building is new to me, so I'm just, how big is it? Would it be a substation?
So we would need to put a garage, or 2 garages, a 2-bay garage on it. But the upstairs and downstairs, there's plenty of facility for 6 bunk rooms and the living facility for 6 people. So that would put an engine and an ambulance crew out there potentially with the 2-bay garage built into the fenced-in area that's currently their yard. It's actually, for the age of the building, it's got a new roof on it, and or 4 years old, but a newer roof on it, and structurally still sound and viable as an option.
And then how does that sizing, 6 beds, et cetera, fold into our growth projections and where we'll be needing to grow our staffing levels in the future?
So that would support a 4-person engine company and a 2-person ambulance, which would be a large step up from what we currently have as far as both our station, our numbers in our station. That would support the number of people we're looking at adding throughout this process. So that, just that one substation alone. We probably wouldn't put both of them out there all the time, but it would put us in a position to move into programs like student programs and those type of things, which we currently can't do because we don't have the facilities.
Okay, thank you. So continuing on, real property leases, have any additional thoughts on this, Council President?
So the 2 things identified in this document for real property leases is a chill tower at 100 years at $1 a year for 100 years, and then, or something like that. And then the Station 1 across the street here that was built in '86 and has some needs at 10 years, similar rate, and then potentially selling that at the end of the 10 years and splitting those proceeds, but the document doesn't call out how that split is going to be made, and so I think that is of some discussion we should have tonight as far as what we want to keep as a city asset and what we want to make sure creates a sustainable fire district model would be something I would want to come out of this meeting with tonight.
That would be helpful. That would need to be in the document that we move forward in the resolution, so.
And if the Comcast building fits into that discussion, then
We can add that in, or the new district can enter into a lease agreement after the fact. I honestly don't know. Jeff, I'm not exactly sure when the lease agreement is up with Comcast. And
I think it's got another 4 years, plus or minus, maybe 4 years minus a couple of months. I do think Comcast is interested in getting out of the lease. In fact, they were originally planning to just vacate the building, and they did move their retail store to Newburgh a couple of years ago. The lease terms required them to pay the balance of the lease out, and so they chose to keep their maintenance staff housed in that building. But I think at this point, it would probably be a discussion we'd want to have an executive session around land acquisition, but I do think there's probably room to talk with Comcast about that process.
okay, thank you.
I have a question.
Councillor Payne.
Thank you. So speaking to Adam's point about district viability, I guess I would wonder or want to discuss the potential of Station 1 just going to the district altogether just to support the district getting liftoff. It seems like it would be a really expensive undertaking, even in 10 years. And in 1986, the voters voted to create a new station, seismically appropriate or not. And so it feels like there would be sort of some backwards movement, I guess, even with the proceeds of the sale in 10 years.
So the reason there's discussion around the station's location, given the current traffic flow and patterns of the city, is not in an ideal location for emergency responses. So the concept about moving from that station to multiple substations around the community would better serve our community, both city and rural. When I say community, when I'm talking about the districting, but the city also, to improve our response areas by having remote substations, 2 or 3, depending on locations, rather than coming out of the central core area of the community. So given the tenure and the cost of upgrading the facility to get it to current seismic standards, we have been looking, regardless of the districting, we've been looking at options to try and find alternatives to deploying from a single central station to multiple stations for the community as a whole, for the city as a whole, regardless of the district conversation. So, so that has been on our radar and has been involved in some of the studies that we've done, both the station study that was done quite some time ago, as well as some of the work that we've done with the SCI. While that is a long-term process, we recognize that, and but it's just to inform. I'm trying to inform you on the reason why we would look at getting rid of the station to start with.
Yeah, that yes, I mean, people being behind or in front of an emergency vehicle creates, hazards. So at the busiest intersection in town, it certainly is a safety issue. I guess my concern would be more around the dialogue of what's necessary to get the district going and sustainable and be viable over the long term. Having a $5 million asset versus $2.5 million of assets, I guess, is where my brain goes.
Any other councilors have thoughts? If not, I have some. Go ahead, Mr. Tower.
Yeah, let me add a little bit to that conversation. I think because, in addition to what the chief talked about, about this not being the ideal location for an existing fire station. The long-term financial plan that the consultant group put together did contemplate the construction of yet-to-be sited new stations, and that is built into the financial assessment. There wasn't any specific financial analysis of this building done. As a part of that, there was the presumption that the new district would have taxing authority to build those stations over time, probably through bond issues. It is an asset that has benefited directly from investment by the taxpayers in the city of McMinnville, and my sense as we move through this part of the process is that sharing that asset seemed to be equitable, because we do provide over a long time fire service to this district, although not at our full cost. And so the community has borne kind of a disproportionate share of the costs of that development and repair and upkeep over the years. So it felt to me like starting at a place where we agreed what the value of the asset was and agreed to share that asset would provide some stewardship for the city taxpayers and also provide some support for the new district moving forward. And certainly the details are subject to further discussion and negotiation, but that's a little bit of the rationale for why it's presented the way it is to council at this point.
Thank you. Councillor Menke, and then do you have one? And then Councillor Chenoweth, please.
I read the suggestion on this, and I actually personally thought it was good. I was a little concerned with us, will that fire station actually be viable for 10 years? I mean, I know there's mold issues, there's a lot of issues in that building.
The mold.
Besides the size.
Mold's been remediated.
Oh, it has
That's
been
taken
completely
care of, yes,
remediated?
And we've done some upgrades to the restrooms upstairs and bathrooms.
Oh, okay, well, good. I did not know that.
Some of that work has been taken care of. I mean, there's still work to be done, but, I mean,
Okay, I was just curious.
some of the health and safety issues have been remediated,
Okay, so it's still a viable building and probably for at least a 10-year period?
yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Chenoweth.
My question has been mostly answered by what Jeff said, but maybe you can expand a little further. I'm trying to understand the rationale of $1 per year on leasing that building, and why. And you kind of hit the other part of my question, which is why we're splitting the proceeds. So we've kind of hit that, but can we come back to the why only $1 a year for that building?
Sure, I'll let Rich weigh in as well. I mean, again, my sense is that in occupying the building, the new district is going to take on the maintenance and upkeep of that building, and it felt to me like that. Well, I also think the consultant didn't assume a market rate lease when they did the assessment. They assumed that the building would be available as a fire station for the fire district, and so I think partly we're playing off the consultant's assessment of that, and I actually think it is more likely that a new station or new substations will be constructed well within the 10 years, and we're thinking the 10 years is probably more than adequate to be able to move the issue forward. We weren't really looking at a sort of a market rate concept for the lease of that building, just to really provide stability for the fire service and really encourage the district to move on those new substations sooner rather than later. The prospect for new development and new population growth in certain parts of town will also provide the opportunity for station dedication and acquisition as part of the development of that property. And so we were sort of trying to, play property Tetris in our minds about what are the important moving parts to be able to sustain fire service and also look at the new facilities. A market rate lease just frankly didn't seem to add a lot of financial value to the city and just an extra stressor on the district that I don't think had been contemplated in the consultants.
Yeah, the consultants did not contemplate a financial leasing process of the models, and the financial models were built on the transition of all assets and all debts into the new district. And in this case, working with Jeff, we're trying to come to this conclusion as a model of trying to keep the financials the same with an outcome that would be beneficial to both if we get to the point where the property was sold.
Thank you. Councillor Payne.
Sorry, am I interrupting your questions, gentlemen?
No,
No,
please go ahead.
that, I just wanted to hear the rationale and kind of get it out there. So,
Okay.
thank you.
Thank you. I just want to make sure that I understood that right, that for $1 a year, the district is going to lease lease Station 1, and the city is going to do all of the maintenance.
No, the dollar a year is lease rate is correct, but then the district takes on the maintenance. And that dollar a year is very common in IGAs.
Right, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, I just wanted to make sure I understood the maintenance piece. Thank you.
Sal, did you have a question? Could we lower these just a little bit? I can't see the faces of the counselors to my right, and it makes it hard to know if they are asking a question or not. Sorry to be, but I want to make sure I'm seeing people's questions. Okay, are other questions from counselors at this time, or statements? So my thoughts on this are I'm very supportive of an IGA that works towards the sustainability of the new district, of the new proposed district. I'm very supportive of sharing the asset and recognizing the financial contributions of both the residents of McMinnville and the contributions of the new district. What I'm uncomfortable with in here is language that directs us to divest an asset that is in downtown McMinnville, that's a whole city block in 10 years. And so my question would be if we could formulate that language to not lock us into a sale being the only way to exercise the asset at the 10-year mark.
I think we can do that.
Thank you.
I would be in agreement with that.
Great. Yes, Council President.
To clarify on that,
Please understand, a lot of this is fire chief language off of template as we're going through this process, so the feedback you're getting will have an attorney help us craft that into that process. It won't be Rich's language.
Okay, and Council President, you have,
just to clarify your point there, so instead of there being a need to sell or have to sell at the 10-year mark, what do you envision at the 10-year mark? Like, one of the partners buys out the other partner at?
no, I think that there's a lot of possibilities. If the building is going to, I don't want to limit the possibilities. It's not that I have a specific idea in mind. If I was to throw out something that could happen, for instance, the district and the city could lease that property for redevelopment, and that could be mixed commercial and housing, which would be perfect and well situated in our city, and wouldn't necessarily need to be an investment of the city or the district, but could be used to make money for to continue to make money for the city and the district, as opposed to a one-time influx where then we also no longer have the property at our disposal, by any of us.
Okay, so you still feel that tonight we should come to an agreement as a body on where we would like to see that percentage wise on that building? That's 50-50 or 70-30 or 80-20 or?
I would need direction on that for the,
How much of that does the district own and how much of that asset does the city retain I guess is my question.
Yeah, I think it's hard. I would be pressed to make any direction other than what's already come from staff, based on, and perhaps staff can verify that this isn't an assumption, based on the fact that there's been a financial evaluation done of those inputs, and so the idea of splitting the asset is coming from a place of already having evaluated that, and I wouldn't have any other data to make any other recommendation off of this evening anyways.
Well, and I think with the district doing the maintenance, since, you effectively have potential for appreciation and, the quality of the building is maintained. And so there should be some accounting for that in favor of the district, likely, since they're the ones making that investment over the next 10 years.
I also think, you know, the forward thinking of our mayor for pointing that out, we don't know what's going to happen 10 years from now. And while, yes, they may make the transitions they need to make before now, or before 10 years, the voters may not let them make that transition. And so if we have hard and fast language that says in 10 years we're selling this asset, I think that could end up creating another problem down the road. And I really like the idea of keeping the asset and splitting 50-50 on potential other investment we can use with it. So I thank you for bringing that up.
And do you think in the conversations you've had with rural fire moving forward that would be a palatable change to what's been discussed so far? If it's sharing the asset, hitting that, you know, getting to that time frame, doing the IGA, do you think that to me it feels supportive in the same way, but I can also hear how it might not, and I always try to think about how information will be received.
I have a meeting scheduled with the chairman tomorrow, so I think that they would be open to that.
Okay.
I had a meeting with him this morning about the same subject, and then I told him I'd catch up with him on the follow-up from council.
Okay.
Is there going to be a revenue need for perhaps a further fire station at that point in time? I mean, I don't know why it was necessarily picked as 10 years, but my question is there a need for revenue at that point?
For a new station?
Yeah. Or whatever. Maybe a new fire truck, who knows?
Oh, yeah, we're a great big revenue-eating beast. I would assume there's going to be a revenue need in 10 years for, I mean, our fleet are 20 to 25 years are what we're supposed to be going on. You know, we need 2 additional substations and possibly a third. So there will always be a need for the department to try and improve service levels. So yes, I think at the 10-year mark, part of the projections were that the district was set up financially sound for the first 5 years of the district with the taxing rate that we were giving, but we were starting to do that grow down, so that type of a revenue stream might help offset that if we got to the 10-year mark. And
So I like what Remy's saying too, but I see the need that perhaps that some form of buyout should happen at that point in time.
Well,
Or if we can word
there's
it
two
somewhat
thoughts.
nebulously as a disposal of the building and hopefully that you will walk away with some proceeds.
yes, but that's one way, and the other way is it's a steady stream, constant revenue that can be applied to a loan or a bond payment.
Yeah,
So
but my concern is it may not be a significant enough stream for you.
no,
Yeah, so I think what I'm hearing is the want for flexibility in the language that would still allow for a sale if that's what the district and council decided in the 10 years down the road. Thank you.
Did we ever get clarity on the ownership basis at the end of the 10 years that Adam was asking for?
Well, I think that's kind of what we're talking about right now, that it would be, that it would be a shared asset at that time. That's the direction that I hear that we're giving.
Like 50/50 or?
And that's shared. 50/50 is shared.
Yeah, and I would think, you know, the ability to leverage that asset for loans and other potential income, I think might actually prove a very valuable asset to keep rather than offing at that point. So and yes, I would say 50/50 as well.
That was the 50/50 was the intention of splitting the proceeds in the recommendation here. So it seems like a healthy.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. Well, great. Then
It seems a little overly generous from the standpoint of McMinnville taxpayers to me that we're doing, I mean, the $1 a year lease, I certainly understand, but, you know, transferring the full, you know, half the value of the asset, I'm having a little more struggle with.
what would your solution be, Counselor?
Not a 50/50 split. I mean, I don't have a huge problem with it, but I do feel like that's a significant value, you know, asset for the city. It has tremendous value, and I just have a hard time just, you know, handing over half the value and walking away.
So would more financial information or data or analysis help you feel more comfortable either with that or with a direction that might feel more comfortable to you? Or is it you're just letting it be known that you're uncomfortable with that
I
rate?
don't see why the city would, I mean, I can see some benefit to ratepayers because at some point they're going to, if we sell or move away from this station, they're going to need some value to put something towards the next station, so I understand that. But, yeah, I guess I'm just struggling with just handing over that big of an asset.
For an additional data point, Rich, what's the annual maintenance cost we're currently spending on Station 1?
We're at about $120,000 annually. That's not counting we replaced a $20,000 air handling machine yet this year. We have, I think, it might be 110, 50, and 60. That's budgeted
So let us offer to come back with a little more information, because the other piece that's not in that is the upkeep and maintenance that we're not doing on the building. You know, we did that building assessment
Right.
a couple of years ago, and there are near-term and long-term investments that are not currently
Sure.
budgeted and accounted for, and that's a liability that's out there in terms of the potential commitment to make those more significant capital upgrades and system upgrades. So let us bring some information to you and allow Rich to have the conversation with the district, and maybe we can close the loop on this with you in a couple of weeks.
Sounds good, Councilor Gary.
Okay for you?
works for me. Yeah.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you.
In the hypothetical event of in 10 years, finding a more creative use for the space as you outlined, and if it's no longer needed or required as a fire unit, in the event of a 50-50 split, it would have to be equally agreed upon on what the use would be. Is that correct? Or in the case we retain more ownership, we can compel the use of that space and merely share in the distribution of profits?
That's a good point, Councilor.
So if we desire to control what goes there more, I would lean, yeah.
Like a buyout potential?
No, just if we own 75% of the interest or 60% of the interest, we can compel the lesser owner to.
You want 51% kids?
Right.
How do you feel about 51-49, Sal? No, I just want, I found your scenario interesting, and so given the ownership discussion we were talking about, it seems that if that's the case, which I find that compelling, the ability to control the destiny of that as the long-standing creators and stewards of that property in 10 years, I would find that a really good reason.
City Manager?
So the proposal is that the city would maintain ownership of the asset, and that we would agree to share the value of that asset. And I think we could maintain that standard in a sort of a more flexible development set of scenarios that maybe gets to the idea of a long-term land lease and or some sort of profit share or revenue share from the accruing development, whatever that was. And it would still be a city-owned facility or city-owned land, but we'd share the financial benefits. I'm seeing head nods from at least a couple of folks on that. So
Additional thoughts on this particular bullet point?
I just have a quick question, just for clarity. I think I already know the answer, and I hate it when I ask questions that I think I already know the answer to, but this package that was put together weighing all of the components individually to come up with a whole that would be acceptable to both the fire, the rural, MAC rural, and us. And so where we might see like we're getting a little taken advantage of on this piece of property, it's being offset by other areas or other concerns. Am I thinking of this correctly? That to get the whole picture, we can't look at one specific asset. We have to look at the entire.
it's certainly a system for sure, and we have tried to stay as close to the assumptions that were made in the consultant study, because that was what provided the compelling argument for this model to move forward. It was jointly supported along the way, and all of the partners agreed to sort of the assumptions and the results of that study. So we're really trying to make sure that this piece of the process matches as closely to that as we can. I mean, I can't tell you there aren't some things that are a little bit different, but yeah, we're trying to look at it in a holistic fashion as opposed to just focusing on the property. The property's a big part of it, and there's all the other stuff too in terms of the people and the other physical assets and how the district will support those assets in the future, and who's going to pay maintenance, and how long will the city contract for services. And there's a billion details, but we are trying to look at it in a systemic way.
And if I could follow up just on one point, the rural district had similar dialogue and discussions around their reserves and what to do with those reserves, and they felt like it was important because those came from their taxpayers, and they wanted to find a way to make sure that their taxpayers benefited from their reserves. So you'll see language in there that speaks specifically to dedicating those funds for substations that will improve response times for the rural area also. So they didn't just swipe the table across the bank accounts and slide everything in. They had some language added in that was.
I understand that. One concern I have is I don't want to be making a decision just based on the costs, liabilities, and valuation of the asset in question, if in fact the process of determining that we should go 50-50 on this included other inputs that are not part of that building itself. If it was more of a holistic picture that led to that decision that this particular asset's going to be at 50-50. So as that information is being provided to me, I want to know the full picture of how we got there.
Okay.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you, Counselor. So we're going to go down to ambulance billing accounts. Any questions, concerns here that people would like to address at this time? Counselor Menke?
I assume there'll be an effort prior to when all this happens to collect as much as possible from the city's point of view, and then whatever's left is going to go with the fire district. Is that an unreasonable thought, or no?
Well, we're on a continuous cycle
Right.
of collect, yes. I mean, we have a company doing the ambulance billing for us, so they're on a continuous cycle, and the revenue.
At what point is the cutoff going to be? I'm sorry, I must have missed that.
So so we've identified that the ambulance billing that is currently within the ambulance billing company that we're currently using. There are ambulance bills out there that are either in debt service collection or that are a part of the old system, and there would be no way that we can keep up with those and monitor those and track those, because we wouldn't have access to that old system anymore. And we count on the revenues from the SDW in our daily operations and funding the operations. So that's how we made that breakup.
Okay.
Thank you. Next, volunteer retirement fund. Thoughts here? Generally, everybody's happy that we have a volunteer retirement fund.
I think just as long as volunteers that have put their time in are taken care of, and if that is done best by that going to the new district, then that's where it should go.
I am curious if there are any other additional, I guess, HR liabilities that would go, in the asset and debt transfer that would be big. I mean, volunteer retirement fund's not excessive. I think they cap out at what, like $540 a month or
The
something.
fund is actually at $855,000.
Right, but I mean, as far as like the payout goes, it's less minor as volunteers versus full-time staff.
Well, part of the transition is the new district picks up all of the employees of the city of McMinnville that are currently employed in the fire department.
Right, so I guess that's the question is, are there going to be liabilities with that pickup of staff for future retirement that will be excessively expensive? Like tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 PERS type stuff.
Right. So the employees that transfer over their PERS debt would transfer over with the employees that are currently employed.
Okay.
Okay. Any additional thoughts on this line, on this budget, or bullet point? No? Great, councilors. And then finally, city retention of current taxing authority used by the fire department. I've generally heard that the city would like to retain its taxing authority, and I will open it up for additional conversation and comments. Councilors. Councilor Chenoweth.
I just feel like we need to be real clear to the voters if that's our intent. One of the problems that happened in Newburgh is that wasn't made real clear, and the result wasn't positive for the city or anybody involved. If our intent is to keep that taxing authority, then I think we got to be really clear that we're doing that for the citizens, and depending on how you're looking at it. It may require us to consider using language that limits our ability to use that taxing authority, taking it in stages going forward over some period of time, rather than taking the entire taxing authority and immediately bringing it into our budget. That's kind of what it ended up with at the city of Newburgh. As I understand it, they got it phased in over X period of time of that taxing authority. I think we need to do something to make it really clear. Whichever way we go, the voters have to be on board and know that that's what we're doing.
Mr. Towery?
So, yes, we've heard that from the council too. This is the first step of a two-step process. The first step is you make a determination, are you going to retain your taxing authority, yes or no? The second conversation is, at what point will you exercise that taxing authority? That's the conversation that you have not had yet, that we propose you have after we do the next polling exercise, so that that's informed by the polling results around that issue. And so you can retain your taxing authority in this first step and not levy those taxes out into the future at your discretion. In fact, every year, as part of your role as a budget committee member, you make a decision about how much of the city's taxing authority to exercise. So that's an annual process, and the council can can set the policy expectation for how and when those taxes will be levied. That's part B of the conversation that we're not presenting you tonight, but we expect to have that discussion in the next couple of months or so.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Towery. Unless I hear any objection, my understanding is the council definitely wants to retain its taxing authority, so we don't need to. Okay. Chief, do you want to summarize what you heard on these bullet points, so that if we need any clarity walking at this point, that we can?
I would like to just verify to make sure that I'm accurate in what we covered. Vehicles and equipment and materials were good for the transfer. Real property leases, the fire station training area sounded okay. We'll come up with some clarity, some language on the flexibility at the 10-year mark, and some information and numbers back on both the study that was done on the deferred maintenance as well as our annual maintenance costs to help with the decision on the split. Is that accurate on that part?
That's what I understood.
Okay. And that the city, the wish is to maintain their current taxing authority. That would be basically vacated by the fire department's move. And
Volunteer retirement.
volunteer retirement would move over to continue with the volunteer retirement program.
That is also what I heard.
Okay. We talked about the Comcast building as a viable and potential option as we move forward. One of the items I did want to discuss, Councilor Chenoweth brought it up, was that we're being very cautious about our language as we're moving forward with the petition. It's very cautious on what we say about the taxing authority and what the rates are and that type of thing. so that once the council makes the decision before the election, we can be very clear going into the election on what is going to happen with the taxing authority. So the voters, when they have that information, they have that information up front, prior to voting.
Could I make a comment? Because I was at your education seminar the other night, and I noticed that that was not brought up. But when I went online, you do address it in a paragraph, and you're pretty specific that this city will likely not be giving up its taxing authority.
Yes, yes.
So it's kind of a mixed message at the moment, then.
Well, we're trying to be transparent about what the likely intent of what the city is, but we're also not trying to convolute the dialogue at this point about should this be put on the ballot or not. This is not should we vote for it or not. This is should this go on to the ballot, and these are the improvements if it goes on the ballot, and this is the costs for the fire station. And then when it gets to the election, then we'll have the dialogue around what the city's going to do with its retained taxing authority, and we can
So the polling will basically
polling
discuss
will guide council on what they need to do with that and how want to do with that and how they want to implement that. And then we will be in a position where I'm not able to
Yeah.
have that dialogue other than, actually, that dialogue on the retained tax authority won't have to do with the election, but it will impact the election. So we'll defer to the attorneys on what we can say and can't say in our world. But our goal is to try and identify the improvements and what happens if it does, what happens if it doesn't on the ballot measure to get it on the ballot, and then identify what the city's intent is, because of the timing of this, we don't have that intent and that dialogue and that polling available to us at this point. It was recommended by the consultants to bring that into online before the election, so we are being transparent with the citizens. We're not trying to hide that that's the end goal. It's already in the documents. We've already put it on our website. But the decision about that is still forthcoming after feedback from the citizens through polling. And
That's good, because that's what I told two people who asked me the exact question right after the meeting.
Yeah,
I probably should have just drawn them over and had them talk to you, but.
I think it's super important that we are very transparent with the voters. That the last thing we want to have happen is the voters feel like we're pulling the wool over their eyes. That will be a torpedo in this process.
Well, no doubt, communication, transparency, and accountability are the goals of the council, and I'm glad that we're all on the same page. It does lead me to question, I'm wondering if Citizen Lab, our community engagement software, will be loaded and operational, should be by that time, right?
Yes, we're looking at a go live near the end of September probably on that.
Great. So that will be a useful tool in communicating as well, I believe.
we have a mass mailing going out this week to all the residents of McMinnville and McMinnville Rural Fire Protection District, advertising the September 6th public meeting here in this room about the ballot measure, the potential ballot measure, and the prospective petition, and we're hoping to get some good solid feedback on those issues at that time, as well as we'll be back to the council on the, I believe I'm on the agenda for the 13th, with the attorney-reviewed languaged resolution for the package that has to go for the prospective petition.
Thank you. And I know our communications director made promotional material and put that on social media today as well, which is also a good way of trying to reach into more pockets. And certainly I welcome all the councilors that see that, of course, you're all following the city of McMinnville on social media, if you're on social media. So if you want to share that information out, we can all help get people in the room and into the systems where we're attempting to share information. Okay, well, it is 6:48, and unless anybody has anything else they're dying to say, I'm going to go ahead and close the work session, and we will take a 10-minute break and be ready to start the public meeting at 7. Thank you. Good evening and welcome to the August 23rd, 2022 meeting of the McMinnville City Council. I'd like to call the meeting to order at 7 o'clock and ask our city recorder, Claudia Cisneros, to do a roll call.
Counselor Geary,
Present?
Counselor Minke,
Present.
Counselor Chenoweth,
Present.
Counselor Payne,
Present.
Counselor Peralta is here but not at the dais. Council President Garvin,
Here.
and Interim Mayor Drapkin.
Here. Thank you. Meeting accessibility services and ADA notice. The Kent Taylor Civic Hall is accessible to persons with disabilities. A request for an interpreter or for other accommodations for persons with disabilities should be made in advance with our city recorder, Claudia Cisneros. And I would like to call on our council president, Adam Garvin, to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. To the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, Council President. At this time, we'll take comments from community members. Any interested audience members are invited to provide comments and any comments that require some type of follow-up will be assigned to a staff member. Anyone may speak on any topic other than a matter in litigation, a quasi-judicial land use matter, or a matter scheduled for public hearing today or at some future date. Comments will be limited to 3 minutes per person for a total of 30 minutes. If you wish to speak, please use the raise your hand feature in Zoom. Or you can sign up directly with Claudia. There are sign-in forms at the front of the room. If you are on Zoom, when it's your turn, we will call on you and unmute you. And you can also send a chat directly to our city recorder if you would like to make public comment this evening. So we'll start with in-person comments. Do we have anybody signed up, Claudia?
No.
Would anybody in the audience like to submit any testimony before the council this evening? No, thank you. Do we have anybody on Zoom that would like to make public comment this evening? Do we have anybody on the phone that would like to make public comment this evening? Okay, well then we will move into our public hearings. Tonight we're having a public hearing to consider Ordinance 5123, authorizing a new city services charge for residents and businesses in McMinnville that will support core city services, including police, fire, and ambulance, parks and recreation, library, park maintenance, planning and community development, homeless and housing support, and administrative activities dedicated to serving and protecting the public. I'd like to call on our Finance Director, Jennifer Cuellar, to give a presentation of the proposal.
So, good evening, everyone. So, thank you, Mayor, for reading from the header of the public hearing. I think that basically covers the gist of it, but I just wanted to add that the city services charge represents one mix of funding mechanisms identified in November 2021 in Resolution 2021-55 regarding sustainable resources to be able to support core services, address deferred maintenance and prudent capital replacement investments, as well as the goals and objectives contemplated by the city's strategic plan, MacTown 2032. In terms of a brief background on the discussions that have been taking place, at the June 22nd, 2021 council meeting, the governing body did adopt in its annual goals one regarding city government capacity, right-sizing city services, and address insufficient resources by finding new sustainable funding sources and look for ways to bring additional revenue into the general fund. So Starting that summer in July, the City Council and Budget Committee met for four different times in July, August, September, and in October, when at that final joint meeting, it was recommended that the city follow up on initiating a service fee, among other actions, to support general city services. In addition, the city manager and finance director, we met with McMinnville Water and Light in October to discuss the city's sustainable resources challenge, as well as the options for addressing the general fund's persistent budget gap, and that likely there would be a city service charge included in the actions. And then Resolution 2021-55 was adopted by City Council in November, which formalized that recommendation to move forward with city services, a city service charge. At this point, it's important to note that, as well, I'd like to say that an important component of all of the discussions over the last year regarding sustainable resources for the city has been the priority to find solutions that will have a low impact on the most economically vulnerable members of our community. And the provision that sets multifamily dwellings at 75% of the single-family charge, as well as households that receive utility assistance or other federal assistance programs being set at 10%. That's described in the resolution as setting the rates, not in the ordinance itself. But I did want to call out that that's a component of what the city has been talking about. And then finally, today we made 3 small changes to the resolution, which I sent out via email, and I have copies that I'll distribute, or changes to the ordinance, excuse me. And two are at the suggestion of McMinnville Water and Light, our partners, and then a third was just a typo that we noticed at the end of the day that we wanted to correct in the ordinance. So I will pass those along now while we're... And that's
it?
Yep.
Thank you. Do any councilors have questions for staff at this time? Councilor Peralta.
Thank you, Mayor. Just one question on the 75% reduced residential electric services for multifamily. Is that, does that include anything other than R1, or is it just large apartment structures? So R4?
The ordinance doesn't give context for our zoning issues like that. So perhaps Walt knows more about those details. I'm not sure.
City manager.
So the intent is to acknowledge that folks who live in multifamily dwelling circumstances tend to make less than those who live in single-family dwellings, and so discounting the full rate for apartment dwellers, whether it's a duplex, triplex, quadplex, any of those will be captured as we have contemplated with Water and Light, and we're also working to find a way to apply that same rate to folks who live in mobile home parks. It's a little bit trickier based on the data that exists right now.
And it's not based on the zone that people live in, it's based on the character of the structure.
Right, but for example, my house is a R4 residential house, so it's zoned for use multifamily. I don't know how we distinguish.
It's not the zoning that would determine it, it's the use.
Okay.
So if it's been developed for multiple family, then it would be characterized and built for multiple family. If it's been utilized for single family, even though it could be used for multiple family, then it'll be billed for single family.
Mr. Towery, will you explain how we are able to determine that with between the electric meter and water meter, maybe add some clarity?
So the circumstance that Councilor Peralta is talking about is a little bit tricky because a traditionally single-family home that's converted to multifamily dwelling may not have multiple electric meters. And so that one may actually be one that we need to work to figure out a little bit. We're attaching the residential fee to electric meters because even in multifamily developments, all of the residents have their own electrical account. And so we can assure that the discounted rate does accrue to the tenant. Unlike if we attached it to the water meter, which is typically a master water meter, that benefit would, if there were one, would go to the owner of the facility, and we wouldn't be able to guarantee that that same benefit accrued to the residents. We also wouldn't be able to implement the 10% discount for folks who qualify for utility assistance if we were attach it to the water meter. So that's why we use the electric meter, because even an apartment or other typical, a traditional multifamily building, duplex, triplex, that sort of thing, everybody has their own electric account. Does that help?
Yeah, that does. Thank you for clarifying that mechanism.
Thank you. Other questions for staff at this time? Okay, we will now start to hear public testimony. Each person testifying will be allotted 3 minutes for their testimony. We will start with the people who signed up in advance to testify. Please remember to include your name and address for the record. And Claudia, who is our first person to testify this evening?
Before we start on public testimony, I did want to state for the record that we received one public comment that Jennifer sent out and will be made part of the packet. Additionally, we received another email today from Joya, which will also be made part of the public record tomorrow.
And Jennifer, that other public comment has been distributed to council. Great. Okay, we will now start with public comment, please.
Thank you. We have Mark Davis.
Welcome, Mr. Davis. Always lovely to see you.
Thank you, Mayor Drapkin and members of the council. Mark Davis, 652 Southeast Washington Street. I support raising money for the general fund. I do not support the city services fee. I have a hard time saying that because it's not really a city services fee, it's a utility tax or utility fee. I really think that the language is backwards. I mean, when I pay my income taxes, they're not called Pentagon taxes. So I think you ought to be telling the public what you're taxing or what the fee is on to start with. My biggest objection, and I've already said this to you before, is I believe this is a regressive tax that will impact most the people that can least afford to pay it. And I really appreciate the efforts. I mean, you have definitely gone above and beyond to try to figure out how to reduce the amount that you are charging to low-income people. I've heard 10% discount and 75% discount. I think it's exactly the opposite. I think it's a 90% discount and a 25% discount. Just to be technically correct. But I personally believe that the city should be taxing wealth and income. And that's, when you start taxing something like a utility service that everybody needs, you're forcing everybody to pay it and everybody to pay it at the same rate, even though you are doing these discounts. I would point out that there's also some confusion in the material I saw in the packet regarding the percentage for multifamily. On page 38, it's listed at 50%. On page 41, it's at 75%. I don't know. It sounds like 75% is the answer, but I would also point out that not all residents of multifamily properties are low income. I realize the city is not a social service agency and you can't get into checking incomes and are doing the best you can, but that's another problem I have with it. Having said all that, the discounts proposed are in the material you provided, 1,000 people for the 90% discount and 2,933 for the 25% discount. And that's about 30% of the population, and your own information says that 36% of the people are rent burdened. Keep in mind that this utility fee goes directly into that, or excuse me, cost burden for housing, because it's not only renters, but it is homeowners. So it's affecting all of those people, and we're not providing help for everyone. I'm just concerned that we're starting down a path here that is, not the appropriate way to fund city services.
You're in your last minute, Mr. Davis.
Okay, and one last thing is, I've said this before, I said at Water and Light meetings, I mean, this does not do anything to encourage conservation of resources. It adds a fee on top of a bill. If you cut your water use by 10%, it doesn't reduce your city services fee by 10%. So I just think it's additionally regressive in that there's no way people can avoid it. They have to pay it. Thank you.
Thank you. Claudia, next.
Those are all the people that have signed up.
Okay. Would anybody else in the gallery like to testify at this time? Do we have anybody on Zoom that would like to testify? Do we have anybody on the phone that would like to testify? Does any counselor need anything clarified regarding any of the, and I'm sorry I didn't say this earlier, regarding any of the testimony provided? Okay, thank you. So that concludes our public testimony for this evening. Does the staff have anything that they would like to add to the record at this time, or does City Council have any additional questions for city staff? Okay, I will now close the public hearing, and we will move to advice and information items we'll start with reports from councilors on their committee and board assignments. This evening we'll start with Councilor Menke, please.
Okay. There was no YCAP meeting this month, so all I can tell you is that we're starting the audit in October, and things are going well, and there have not been substantial changes in what was happening last month. I did want to talk briefly. The Construction Excise Tax Committee of the Affordable Housing Committee met on Monday this week. We discussed several topics such as likely new construction development for the next year and how to allocate the CET in areas that we have discretion. We decided we need to work in this area in particular. We will meet on September 2nd to continue this discussion, and we will be soliciting other cities such as Newburgh for some of their wording to see how we like it. We also discussed land banking and trusts and land donations in regard to the program presentation of the last Affordable Housing Committee session, and and as a part of that, Vicki Weibargen was there representing the Housing Authority, and she mentioned that they might be able to offer some assistance similar to Prog Ground in the future, depending on their capacity. So we were looking at possibly, receiving some kind of land in the future. And that's it.
Okay, thank you so much. Councilor Payne.
Thank you. The Landscape Review Committee met last week on the 17th and is in the process, made it through the updating the landscaping code, and at their next meeting in September, we'll tackle the tree code.
Thank you, Councilor Peralta.
Historic Landmarks Review Committee meets on Thursday, and Council of Governments has not met since our last meeting. Thanks.
Thank you. Councilor Chenoweth.
Parkway Committee met, discussed where we're at with the bypass where the progress is with the bypass. Getting ready to look at Phase 2A. Prices as we have all experienced, prices are going up, costs are going up. And so there's been some movement of funds from the excess that we had left over from Phase 1. Now is going to have to be spent in 2A. And they're going to continue to look at funding options as we move into the next legislative session. MEVLC met, basically went through our list of priorities and had updates. There's nothing really substantial to bring to the council on where we're at with any of the various projects the MEVLC is working on. We will be meeting with, as most of the councilors know, we will be doing a presentation with to the commissioners on Thursday of this week regarding the Innovation Center and proposed impacts of traffic flow out on Highway 18.
Thank you. Councilor Gary.
DEIAC had election of new co-chairs. We switched from the chair, vice chair to co-chair models. And then that was a fairly light DEIAC heavy meeting, and then we transitioned to their role as the community engagement piece of the Parks and Recreation and Open Spaces Master Plan, or the PROS plan, and got a real good first kickoff of that meeting and input and just laid groundwork on what that master plan document is and should be and can be, and how we take it from there with that group. And then after that meeting ended, we joined on a tour led by Parks Director Muir, as well as joined by David Renshaw and Liz Lazar to go out and see as many of the parks as we could. I think we nearly touched them all, and it was a really great tour that many people joined us for. And then as far as MURAC goes, I met with staff to get up to speed, and I'm awaiting the first official meeting that I can join.
Thank you, Councilor. Did you go to Quarry Park on your...
We drove right by Quarry Park.
Drove right by it.
Drove right by it. And Heather Hollow.
Oh.
Which you know where that one is.
I know where they all are.
I know. I do.
That's the least true thing I've ever said up here. Wonderful. Council President Garvin.
The YCOM meeting got canceled. Last week I was out of state. There was a few meetings that happened. There was a listening and messaging session that the fire district had on Tuesday night. I was able to get some cell service and Zoom into that meeting. There's a Visit McMinnville board meeting that I wasn't able to get cell service for. And sorry, something's in my throat. And then we also had the air show, so we should have some follow-up with the Airport Commission on that. And the Airport Commission did have an out-of-series meeting last week as well to finalize the minimum commercial standards. It was like a workshop, and I didn't get cell service for that either. So I'll have some updates for you guys on those as I loop back around with people in those meetings and have some updates at our next council meeting.
Thank you very much. McMinnville Affordable Housing Commission meets tomorrow, but I did want to pull out a few highlights from the Oregon Mayors Association Conference, which was held in Newport this year. I went to a lot of seminars, so I won't burden you with all of them. A couple call-outs that I thought would be appreciated by council. Councilor Geary, for you, I heard, I don't have one for everybody, let me start by saying that. But, yes, this is the Wizard of Oz. I heard one mayor speak about their investment in their recreation facilities, and he concluded by saying, if you want to get kids off their cell phones, build them a good swimming pool. I thought you would appreciate that. Councilor Peralta, I heard from communities that have been redeveloping unused parks for housing. So those were two very direct things that I thought I would relate back. But beyond that, I really went to a lot of seminars that talked about land use related to short-term vacation rentals, which is quite timely for us. And so I've brought some of those resources and sent them along to our planning director, and also heard about a just spectrum of ways in which different cities deal with short-term vacation rentals. So that was very educational. Additionally, I heard about a really interesting program out of Medford that is a less developed program than the Cahoots program, and you can look up on YouTube for the livability team and see what their city, which is different. Medford is a city, I think they said, of 86,000, so different resources for sure, but in terms of looking at community approaches, I encourage you to check that out, see what they're doing. Of course, we talked about how to fund our cities. I went to also a very interesting work session with the Oregon Air National Guard and heard from Brigadier General Donna Prigmore all about what the Oregon Air National Guard can do for your individual cities, which is not only response in times of emergency, and I went to a number of seminars on emergency response, and there of course were many there who had a lot to share after the last couple years, especially those who are more rural and were surrounded or even decimated by fire. So we heard a lot from Detroit mayor about what that meant when their city was touched by fire, when when they went to their city hall to get their emergency management plan, and city hall actually had burned down and they didn't have one to access. And we heard a lot from the League of Oregon Cities about future work that they're intending to work on. And then, I also went to advice for a new mayor. And that was great. Also, those are my updates, and I'll hand it over to city staff at this time. City Manager Jeff Towery.
Thank you, Interim Mayor Drabkin. A couple of items to report tonight. I'll be out of town Thursday through Sunday of this week, leading the orientation for the incoming ICMA board members. Jenny Berg will be your local point of contact. Happy to announce that we have hired Vicki Hedges to serve as our Human Resources Manager. Vicki will come to us with about 16 or 17 years of HR experience, the last 14 years of progressively responsible experience at Clackamas Community College. She will begin on September 19th. And then finally, happy to announce that this week Wine Enthusiast magazine released their list of Future 40 of 2022. It's a list of winemakers, educators, brewers, sommeliers, viticulturists, and others who have been recognized as influential in the beverage industry. And Interim Mayor Drabkin is one of 4 people from Oregon on that list of 40 people. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Did you want to mention what we received at the event?
Let's save that for September 27th.
Okay.
It'll be our surprise.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Towery. It was an honor, and I didn't know they'd be releasing that news this morning, and been wonderfully surprised today, so thank you. To our City Attorney, Walt Gowell.
Nothing special to report. I would say that I have been interfacing with the attorney retained by the city and the fire district to work on procedures, pushing that concept forward and the appropriate requirements that would be undertaken in connection with the council's placing of a measure or measures on the ballot.
Thank you. Finance Director Jennifer Cuellar.
Nothing to report. Thanks.
Thank you. Fire Chief Rich Leipfert.
We made it out the backside of the air show. It was a successful air show with little or no significant events that occurred. And I would like to take the time to thank both the police and fire's administrative staff, because that is a lot of work throughout the year up until the show, and 3 heavy lift days, as well as our teams and crews that were out in the field. But all of the captains and interim captains and sergeants and our chief officers spent long, hot days out there in the field working with the air show teams for the duration of the day. So I wanted to make sure that I shared our appreciation for both of those teams.
Thank you, Chief. To our City Recorder, Claudia Cisneros.
Nothing to report.
Thank you. And to our IT Director, Scott Burke.
Thanks, Mayor and Councilors. Just one item to note is that we've made good progress on our cyber insurance policy and have scheduled a 30-minute exec session before the next council meeting on September 13th to talk about that process and the outcome, and then also just do a general update on our cybersecurity posture around the city.
Thank you. And that's something the Oregon Air National Guard can help with. Cybersecurity. Okay,
We have Susan Muir on Zoom.
oh, thank you. I'm so sorry. Director Muir, our Parks and Rec Director, do you have an update for us?
I do. Thank you, Mayor. I wanted to announce that we are the fortunate recipients of $20,000 from Schnitzer Steel. Contran, who I think I see on this Zoom meeting, has been working with us on figuring out how we can serve more youth in our community through Parks and Rec programs. So we will be putting that $20,000 donation towards youth-oriented scholarships for our youth sports leagues, youth swim lessons, and also our low sensory swim nights that we've been having at the pool. So I want to thank Schnitzer Steel and Con for their work on that and just really appreciate the partnership.
Thank you so much. Library Director Jenny Berg. And thank you to Schnitzer Steel for their investment in our community. And thank you for your patience as we had a chance to put our minds together and make suggestions on a project. Thank you for the offer, and thank you for the follow-through. And now to our Library Director, Jenny Berg.
Thank you to City Council and the community for making the decisions that led to the expansion of the library hours. Really happy to report that we expanded our hours as of August 1st, and we are now open some evenings, earlier in the mornings, and also added back Sundays. This is very close to our pre-pandemic hours, and I'm happy to offer that to the community.
Thank you very much. And Public Works Director Ann Pagano.
Good evening. Sorry, let me see if I can get my camera to work. Just wanted to follow up real quick to what Councilor Garvin was saying about the Airport Commission meeting. We had a special meeting last week, was a workshop to go through the minimum standards, and the commission voted to approve the standards. So we'll be bringing that to you all for adoption in the near future. I also wanted to special thank you specifically to Chief Leap for his help with the air show. It was wonderful, and it was a really great experience for me to be part of that. So thanks.
Thank you so much. And would our senior planner, Tom Schauer, like to present on behalf of the planning department or have anything to report?
I don't have anything to add this evening.
Thank you very much. Okay, now I believe I've reached all our department heads. And as we move into our consent agenda, I'm going to pull item F off the consent agenda. Would any counselor like any other item removed from the consent agenda? Okay. And would this be the correct moment in the order to ask for any abstentions, or should I?
Just quick clarification, F is a liquor license, were you intending to pull the minutes?
I was intending to pull F, the liquor license, so we could approve the consent agenda and then without doing them one by one.
Thank you.
Okay. Would now be the right time to ask for abstentions? Would any counselor like to abstain from voting on this?
Yeah, yes, due to the fact that I wasn't here for any of these minutes, I am abstaining from this vote.
Thank you, counselor. I'll now entertain
I also was not here, so I'm going to abstain as well.
Okay, thank you. So we have abstentions from Counselor Chenoweth and from Counselor Payne. And I would now ask for a motion to approve the consent agenda.
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion from Counselor Menke and a second from Counselor Gary. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 All those opposed, please say nay. And the consent agenda passed 4-0 with 2 abstentions. And now we will go back and consider a request from Roman Vineyards LLC, DBA I think this is meant to say domain. I'm just going to rely on my knowledge of wine industry things that it's domain and not co-main, but Domaine de Broye for winery, second location, OLCC liquor license located at 455 Northeast Irvine Street. Does any counselor wish to discuss this item? Does any counselor wish to abstain from voting on this item? I'll entertain a motion to approve the item as presented. So moved.
Second.
I have a motion from Councilor Menke and a second from Councilor Gary. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 And all those opposed, please signify by saying nay. The motion passes unanimously, 6-0. We will now move into our resolutions. We're going to have one resolution this evening. We're going to consider resolution number 2022-56, a resolution awarding the contract for the Fox Ridge Road Area Plan to HHPR. I would call on Senior Planner Monica Bilodeau to present.
All right, good evening. I do have a few slides, but mainly the pictures that I was going to bring up were from the staff report. So I can just go through that. This is a resolution to award the contract that's not to exceed $175,000 to the consultant HHPR for the Fox Ridge Road Area Plan. And the Fox Ridge Road area is roughly 234 acres, and it's a portion of the 924 gross buildable acres that was brought into the urban growth boundary. So these are going to be buildable acres for us. And this area is currently in an urban holding comp plan designation, and all urban holding land that has this comp plan designation needs to undergo this area planning prior to the annexation into the city, so prior to someone being able to develop. So just as an overview, the Fox Ridge Road will primarily be housing. There is the high school site that sits to the northern portion of this 234 acres. And then going through the staff report too, we had some rough acres in there. The 5 to 10 acres of neighborhood activity center will be included, and then 1 to 2 acres of neighborhood commercial, and then 2 to 5 will be about medium density, and probably the rest will be a low density housing. And some of those tables were included in your packet that kind of shows in the framework plan, we assigned land needs for each of the 6 areas that will have to go through this area planning. So, and we assigned those acres to that. So tonight, staff is recommending that City Council adopt the attached resolution awarding this Fox Ridge Road Area Plan to the consultant HHPR.
Thank you. Is there any council discussion? I'd like to ask for a motion to approve resolution number 2022-56.
So moved.
I have a motion by Councilor Gary and a second by Councilor Peralta. Is there, at this time, no, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please say nay. The resolution has passed unanimously. We're now going to consider the first reading with the possible second reading of ordinance number 5121, an ordinance approving a comprehensive plan map amendment for the industrial to commercial and approving a zone change from M1 light industrial to C3 general commercial for property of approximately 0.9 acres located at 455 Northeast Irvine Street, tax lots R4421BD 2400 and 2601. Does any counselor need to declare a potential conflict of interest or recuse themselves regarding this ordinance? Yep, we will now consider the matter of ordinance number 5121. Does any counselor object to having the ordinance read by title only? Will the city attorney, Walt Gowell, please read the ordinance by title only?
Ordinance number 5121, an ordinance approving a comprehensive plan map amendment from industrial to commercial and approving a zone change from M1 light industrial to C3 general commercial for property of approximately 0.9 acres located at 455 Northeast Irvine Street, tax like R4421B, D 2400, and 2601.
Thank you very much. I'd like now to call on our senior planner, Tom Schauer, to present.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and Councilors. This ordinance is for comprehensive plan map amendment and zone change for property 455 Northeast Irvine Street. This is on page 90 of the packet. This is a quasi-judicial action following the procedures noted in the zoning ordinance, with the City Council making a final decision following a recommendation from the Planning Commission. The applicable criteria are noted on the PowerPoint presentation. There's a particular section of the zoning ordinance that addresses the applicable criteria for map amendments. The goals and policies of the comprehensive plan are also applicable criteria. And there are some provisions of state law that also apply when a community is amending its comprehensive plan, including its plan map. The Planning Commission held a public hearing on July 21st. They found that the applicable criteria are satisfied based on the information in the record and the findings provided in the decision document, and therefore recommended approval. There was some discussion at the meeting about specific uses, and just as a reminder, this is a proposed map amendment, not a request for specific use or development. So the map amendment and the zone change would enable those uses that are permitted in the proposed zoning district. This is the Elizabeth Chambers Sellers property, most commonly known the old city power station, located at 5th and Irvine. Currently, the property has the industrial designation shown on the left in blue, and the proposal would change the zoning to C3 commercial. Excuse me, this is the comprehensive plan map, so change it to commercial, which is the predominant zoning around it, other than some of the property immediately to the west, including the railroad and immediately west of the railroad. The proposed existing and proposed zoning, it's M1 and would be redesignated to C3 general commercial. So essentially the main difference, the M1 zone is intended for light industrial activities. The C3 commercial zone allows a wide variety of retail and uses such as eating and drinking establishments. Essentially the predominant commercial zoning we have throughout most of town and along 3rd Street as well. The property is uniquely also situated in the Northeast Gateway Overlay District. The Northeast Overlay has 3 different sub-areas, 1, 2, and 3. This property is within sub-area 1, which includes about the 6 blocks shown on the south end of the crosshatched areas here. And this is, of those properties that are within sub-area 1, this is the only one that doesn't already have C3 commercial zoning in addition to the overlay. So essentially the purpose of the Northeast Gateway Overlay and sub-area 1 in particular is for a mixed-use commercial zone. I realize this is not legible at the scale shown, but what this is intended to show is that in sub-area 1, essentially commercial uses, including the types of uses that the applicants discussed developing or activating there, are permitted within Zone 1 of the Northeast Gateway Overlay. Other uses such as light industrial are not permitted in sub-area 1. And so that's a little bit different than a lot of the Northeast Gateway is sub-area 2, which allows a combination of light industrial, commercial, and residential. We've had a fairly recent interpretation from the legal opinion that in order to be eligible for the uses in the overlay zone, there's an applicability section of the Northeast Gateway Ordinance that specifies there would need to be some type of an action such as an expansion or redevelopment for those uses to be triggered. Otherwise, reuse of an existing building would still continue to be subject to the uses of the underlying zone, in this case, the light industrial uses. So this proposal basically aligns the property with the other properties in sub-area 1 of the Northeast Gateway so that it could be used for commercial uses without doing expansions or redevelopment or major expansion of the property to enable those uses that are permitted as commercial uses in the overlay zone. So the applicable criteria essentially are noted on the overhead, and the check marks just kind of are a summary of the findings that were made for each of those in the findings document, noting that those were found to be satisfied. The comprehensive plan goals and policies also satisfied in recognizing this area is already planned for a transition to commercial mixed use through the Northeast Gateway overlay. This enables those uses to occur without the redevelopment or expansion. In terms of looking at our state law, the land use planning goals, the decisions need to be made based on an adequate factual base. We also know that we have an industrial land surplus and commercial deficit identified in the comprehensive plan. So while this property is kind of already commercial in some respects and industrial in some respects, it does still bear the industrial plan designation. So this would allow for that property to be fully designated commercial in the comp plan, the base zoning, as well as the overlay zone. Provisions of statewide goal 9, there's some provisions that apply in terms of doing analysis that applies when properties are greater than 2 acres, and this is just under an acre, so that doesn't apply. And the analysis was done for the compliance with the transportation planning rule, TPR for short, regarding implications for transportation facilities, and found to comply. So again, the Planning Commission recommended approval of the comprehensive plan and map amendment and zone change, which is what would be affected by adoption of Ordinance 5121. So our recommendation is to bring forward that recommendation of the Planning Commission to approve the ordinance. I'd be happy to answer any questions you have for me.
Does anybody have any questions at this time? Okay, I would then ask for a motion to pass ordinance number 5121 to a second reading.
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion by Councilor Geary and a second by Councilor Menke. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 All those opposed say nay. The motion passes unanimously. Ordinance number 5121 passes on its first reading unanimously. I will now ask the City Attorney, Walt Gowell, to read the ordinance again by title only.
Ordinance number 5121, an ordinance approving a comprehensive plan map amendment from industrial to commercial and approving a zone change from M1 light industrial to C3 general commercial for property of approximately 0.9 acres located at 455 Northeast Irvine Street, tax lots R 4421B, D2400, and 2601.
Thank you very much. I will now ask for a motion to adopt ordinance number 5121.
So moved. Second.
So moved by Councilor Peralta and seconded by Councilor Chenoweth. I would ask the City Recorder, Claudia Cisneros, to poll the council.
Counselor Geary,
Aye.
Counselor Minke,
Aye.
Counselor Chenoweth,
Aye.
Counselor Payne,
Aye.
Counselor Peralta,
Aye.
and Council President Garvin.
Aye.
Ordinance number 5121 is adopted by a vote of 6-0. We'll now consider the first reading with the possible second reading of ordinance number 5122, an ordinance amending plan development ordinance number 4688, approving an application for a plan development amendment and approving applications for a large format commercial review with waivers, a landscape plan review, and a partition for property of approximately 1.8 acres located at the southwest corner of Booth Bend Road and Highway 99, tax lot R4429CA00300. If any counselor needs to declare a potential conflict of interest or recuse themselves regarding this ordinance, please do so now. We'll now consider the matter of ordinance number 5122. Does any counselor object to having the ordinance read by title only? Will the city manager, Jeff Towery, please read the ordinance by title only?
Thank you, Interim Mayor. This is the first reading of ordinance number 5122, an ordinance amending planned development ordinance number 4688, approving the application for a planned development amendment and approving applications for a large format commercial review with waivers, a landscape plan review, and a partition for property of approximately 1.8 acres located at the southwest corner of Booth Bend Road and Highway 99, tax lot R4429CA00300.
Thank you. Okay, could we now please call on Senior Planner Tom Schauer to present?
Thank you. This item is on page 195 of the packet. These 4 items are brought forward to predominantly facilitate the development of a fast food restaurant for Burger King at the location. When there are multiple applications, those are consolidated into the review process that provides the greatest opportunity for public involvement. So some of these applications don't normally come before council, but because they are being bundled, they all come to you for one concurrent review. The applications include a plan development amendment. The subject property is part of a larger site that was approved as part of a commercial plan development. And this includes some slight changes to the approved master plan that requires that to come back to council. The site, while it is the proposed building on the site is not what constitutes a large commercial building. It is on a site with the other properties that include Lowe's and Roby's Furniture that are large format commercial businesses. And when other businesses share things like circulation, parking facilities, those are subject to the same standards of review. Site development also includes approval of the landscape plan. And finally, the property includes a partition of the subject property, which is essentially the last remaining piece of undeveloped property within the original plan development area. Again, this is a quasi-judicial action following procedures in the zoning ordinance, with the council making a final decision following the recommendation from the Planning Commission. The applicable criteria are noted on the screen. Again, separate sections of the zoning ordinance apply to the respective application types, and the goals and policies of the comprehensive plan are also criteria for quasi-judicial land use decisions. Planning Commission held a public hearing on July 21st and found that the applicable criteria were satisfied subject to conditions based on the information, the record, and findings provided in the decision document. There was one condition that they recommended be added to the original recommendation, which has been incorporated into the decision document as well. And with those conditions, the Planning Commission did recommend approval of the applications subject to those conditions listed in the decision document. So the subject property includes essentially virtually all of the properties that are bounded by Highway 18, Booth Bend Road, and Highway 99 shown on the map. So it includes the 2 restaurant buildings on the north side of Booth Bend Road, Lowe's, Roby's Furniture, Hometown Dental, as well as the vacant site shown. The request for the plan development amendment changes the master plan essentially for the that portion, essentially the site, but also that portion that's still vacant. And then the other applications apply to that, just the property that's highlighted in blue. The property is zoned commercial. The uses it's commercial with the plan development overlay, which allows for the intended uses. The site, the original plan development master plan is shown on the overhead. This went through a process as it was going through the original approval. It's about the same time the interchange access management plan was being adopted, which led to the current configuration with the properties having access onto Booth Bend Road rather than any direct access onto the highways. The overhead shows essentially the line applicant provided the line work showing the existing layout and incorporating in their proposed site plan, as well as the showing the proposed partition in the parcel that would be, how that would be divided, leaving one vacant parcel to the south of the subject property. This is the proposed partition plan. There's a lot of information on there, but predominantly it would divide the property roughly in half. And there would be, as part of the proposed site plan and partition, one access onto Booth Bend Road, and then also a shared access easement from this property and the other property to the south onto the private driveway that is shared by the other properties there that runs along the to the west side of the slide here. Some of the early conversations with the applicant, they had their access up closer near the Booth Bend Road, near where the driveway enters into the Lowe's property, and with some concerns about a lot of traffic movements occurring in that vicinity where the driveways are stacked in close proximity to Booth Bend Road. They revised that plan to provide additional distance for some of those movements to help reduce some of the congestion up near Booth Bend Road. You can see the area where the access would be shared across the property is highlighted in orange. And this slide shows essentially the site plan with the landscape plan as well. The Planning Commission recommended approval with some minor revisions to the site plan and landscape plan. Just an enlargement there. And finally, part of the large format commercial review has architectural design standards that apply. The applicant did request waivers to, I believe it was 2 of the standards. We did not find that the criteria for the waivers were satisfied, so we're recommending approval of the large format review without the waivers, subject to some conditions to revise the elevations to comply with the applicable standards. And the condition added by the Planning Commission was to ensure that any mechanical equipment, such as rooftop mechanical equipment, would be adequately screened. So, yeah, as a condition, the applicant would be submitting revised elevations demonstrating compliance with that condition. Some of the unique issues, again, are along Booth Bend Road. There are some offset intersections from the road into the different driveways. There are some two-way left turn lanes where there's some potential conflicting movements within the center turn lane where there's offset turn movements. In addition, this area is within the interchange access management plan area. There are some conditions associated with that about avoiding conflicts due to queuing distance at the intersections. So there are some conditions of approval incorporated to address the queuing analysis and potential mitigation if necessary. I talked through the conditions and issues with the elevations already, so I won't go through those again. The predominant issues were related to some of the sheltering elements at the entrances, as well as requirements for a higher percentage of the building materials to be things like brick, stone, masonry, that type of thing. Again, the Planning Commission, with the additional condition, found that the criteria is satisfied with conditions and recommended approval subject to the conditions in Section 2 of the decision document. And consistent with that recommendation, staff is recommending adoption of Ordinance 5122, which would approve those 4 applications with conditions and amend the original plan development to reflect the updated master plan. Be happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you. Council discussion? Councilor Geary.
Excuse me, thank you. Can you confirm the process that this, while having been reviewed by the Planning Commission itself, has not been reviewed? And I realize that if it's not, it's not a requirement, but it has not been specifically reviewed solely by the Landscape Review Committee. Is that correct?
Correct. So the bundled application went through the Planning Commission for their recommendation to you. I did contact the chair of the Landscape Review Committee and shared the plan, asked if there were any areas of potential concern, and did not have any identified.
Okay. And then can you touch for a sec on, I know you went into it in the staff report, but just how they had requested waivers, and then there was some vagary on the waivers, and that you guys had sort of in the packet have concluded that those waivers are not approved and suggest they meet the conditions, and that's reflected in the decision document. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah, there are some of the criteria for waivers require that there is some difficulty about the property or something unique that would make it such that they couldn't meet those, or it would be impractical, or they could achieve the, with some unique site issue, they could achieve those in a different way. Those related to features on the building where we didn't find that those circumstances existed. So while it's still the number assigned to it is a large format review with waivers, we're recommending that the large format review be approved, but without the waivers and with conditions to revise those elevations to bring them into compliance with those standards.
Okay, yeah, they were related to roof and building materials, but so.
Roof, building materials, and some of the sheltering elements near the entrances.
Okay, thank you. That concludes my questions.
Thank you. Any additional council discussion? I now ask for a motion to pass ordinance number 5122 to a second reading.
Pat, so moved.
Second.
I have a motion by Councilor Menke and a second by Councilor Peralta. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed signify by saying nay. The motion passes unanimously. Ordinance number 5112 passes on its first reading unanimously. I will now ask the city manager, Jeff Towery, to read the ordinance again by title only.
Thank you. This is the second reading of ordinance number 5122, an ordinance amending planned unit development ordinance number 4688, approving application for a plan development amendment and approving applications for a large format commercial review with waivers, a landscape plan review, and a partition for property of approximately 1.8 acres located at the southwest corner of Booth Bend Road and Highway 99, tax lot R4429CA 00300.
Thank you. I'd now ask for a motion to adopt ordinance number 5122.
So moved.
Second.
A motion by Councilor Chenoweth.
Mayor, can we have some discussion after? I just want to throw something in.
Yes. And a second by Councilor Menke. Council discussion. Councilor Geary.
Yeah, thanks. Happy to have this keep moving forward. The large format process, how it excludes the Landscape Review Committee, always makes me feel like I'm over my skis a little bit. We have that group of experts that's appointed to look at that stuff. I appreciate that Tom acknowledged and brought in the chair on the process and that he gave his blessing. It seems to be overly adequate on percentages and style and design, but the reason we have that Landscape Review Committee is because I don't know what to look at. And when we look at that, and having gone through a few years of being the liaison in that committee, the discussions are so good, and they add so much to that. It really unifies the character and landscapes of McMinnville. And so again, happy to have this keep going through, but the more we do this process, the more I feel over my skis on that landscape piece and can foresee a day in which I may entertain it going back to that committee as a specific condition. And I know we have tools that allow projects to get going if they sign an acknowledgement that it's still pending approval of the Landscape Review Committee, so it doesn't hold things up, but I just want to express my nervousness with the process as a whole, not on this project, but going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. I would now ask our city recorder, Claudia Cisneros, to poll the council.
Counselor Geary,
Aye.
Counselor Menke,
Aye.
Counselor Chenoweth,
Aye.
Counselor Payne,
Aye.
Counselor Peralta,
Aye.
Council President Garvin.
Aye.
Ordinance number 5112 is adopted by a vote of 6-0. And we will now consider the first reading of ordinance number 5123, an ordinance authorizing a city services charge and declaring an emergency. Does any counselor need to declare a potential conflict of interest or recuse themselves regarding this ordinance? We will now consider the matter of ordinance 5123. Does any counselor object to having the ordinance read by title only? Will our city attorney, Walt Gowell, please read the ordinance by title only?
This is the first reading of ordinance number 5123, an ordinance authorizing a city services charge and declaring an emergency. And I believe the version of it that has been proposed by staff was the one handed out to you earlier by Jennifer Cuellar. Thank you.
Thank you. I would now call on our finance director, Jennifer Cuellar, to present.
Okay, so first I just want to highlight what the changes were in the ordinance and make sure that I consult with our city attorney, Mr. Gowell, as to the proper way to describe that when you all are at a point where you may want to vote on this. So the changes are on the fourth page. McMinnville Water and Light reviewed it and was able to speak with the city manager earlier today, and they had a couple of more detailed questions or, suggestions. So we changed the order in section 7, subsection D, small 1, that the order is electricity, water fee, and sewer fee, instead of sewer was first before. And then on the next page, in section 10 on delinquency, we struck the sentence saying that the city may refuse to restore utility service or services to the premises if a delinquent city services charge were incurred but not paid. So we felt as a practical matter, we don't see that happening given the way we're trying to organize things, and had no concerns about striking that sentence. And then the last was, we just noticed it's not section 12, it's section 11 for the emergency, and that was the typo.
Thank you. Council discussion. The second reading for this ordinance is already scheduled for September 13th. I would now ask for a motion to pass ordinance number 5123 on its first reading.
As amended.
As amended. Thank you.
I so move.
Second.
I have a motion by Councilor Menke and a second by Councilor Geary. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 All those opposed, please signify by saying nay.
Nay.
Nay. And the ordinance number 5123 passes with 4 in favor and 2 opposed. And I will now adjourn the city council meeting at 8:09 p.m.
could hear.
Jessica Payne and Councillor Payne and Chenoweth
Thank you.
opposed.
I just couldn't hear the second voice. Thank you.